This is the number one reason stopping people from being rich through property accumulation. And first of all, it's not about your serviceability, which is your borrowing power, or the deposit/cash that you have currently. Those things are situational in your life, which means in certain parts of your life, certain phases of your life, you have a high income, low income. Sometimes you have more cash, less cash. Very situational. What I'm talking about is more permanent. What I'm really talking about is your emotional association with money, which is your money mindset. And this is now where I'll teach you a technique which I've applied for many of my clients to free yourself from the trauma associated with money. And I call this technique emotional refinance. That's correct, emotional refinance. And it's a technique where we go back in time and look at all the emotional, association, traumatic experience with money. We'll look at guilt, shame, sadness, anger, disappointment, and hate. Now at this point, a lot of you will be saying, hey Q, you're just a mortgage broker. You're talking shit. Let me tell you a bit about my background. I used to be a NLP coach, which is a neuro-linguistic programming coach, and I'm certified. To give you a layman's sense of it, Tony Robbins, walking on fire, UPW, dating with destiny, spending $15,000 to $20,000 on his courses. I did all that. Because I was so intrigued with the subconscious mind, I dropped another 20 to 30 G's more on self-development with, business coaches, mindset coaches, yada, yada, yada coaches. And eventually I became a business mindset coach, as they all do, because people started seeing what I was doing and were interested in the trial and it worked for them. And I started charging them, sometimes 5 to 10 G's per session. And disclaimer, I don't do this anymore because the premise is when people give you their money, they also give you their problems. And I just didn't want to do that anymore. But the process that I helped with these clients was called timeline therapy. Now, again, I don't do this anymore, so don't come to me, for some type of therapy you saw on this TikTok. I'm going to tell you to fuck off because I don't want your emotional baggage just for the sake of a bit of money. So with that as a premise, I'm going to show you how timeline therapy works, or I call it the emotional refinancing. Hitting the drawing board, when we're doing emotional refinance session therapy, which is a timeline therapy session, I just made it fancy with emotional refinance, but it's very similar to refinancing your home. So over here, we have the guide, you call it the spiritual guide, or this is me when I was doing the sessions before. And then we do it, in a room face to face, and this would be the client and they're sitting on a chair. And mind you, I was still a mortgage broker. I've been a mortgage for 15 years, but this was just a hobby. A lot of business clients approached me to do this session for them. A lot of these clients that come to me, they have a lot of money mindset limitations. For example, they're running a business and all they could make is 200 to 300K. They can never break through of that, barrier. Something was holding them back. Or you have a couple that would have a combined income of $400,000 and for the last 10 years, they only have like $20,000 in savings. Something was holding them back in terms of their money association. And how I was trained before, obviously I paid a lot of money to learn this technique, which I'm now giving to you for free, is basically the timeline therapy, which I call emotional refinance. We first look at what is the objective of this client. What are they trying to do through this therapy session? For example, self-employed client wants to make more money, or a PAYG combined couple wants to save more money to, buy property to accumulate. And then the 60-minute to 2-hour session, yes, sometimes it takes 2 hours for one client, is they'll sit on this chair where I, as a guide, will travel back into time, the past, to uncover the emotions of guilt, shame, anger, hate, disappointment, and sadness related to money in this example. So to give you an example, for example, if you were sitting there, right, I'll ask you to close your eyes, and then I'll say, hey, close your eyes. Travel back in time to a time in your life where you feel shameful about money. Close your eyes and travel there right now. And I'll guide you. Obviously, this person will be like, what the fuck, travel back in time? But anyway, with a bit of guidance, this person slowly finds a time in their life, which is the timeline therapy. For example, he was 14-year-old, and there was a shameful experience with his father about money. As a guide, now that we've pinpointed a time in history where this person felt shame or guilt is pinpointed, this is where I'll now ask the person to take a deep breath, 3 deep breaths, and imagine floating above themselves. So for example, if this is the chair which my client is sitting and this is my client, they will imagine this is, their third eye, floating above them when they were a 14-year-old, to imagine with them and their father, and they were here, just imagining and overseeing what's happening over here. When that person is like visually in their mind floating above that scene that they're in, which is their 14-year-old self, I'll ask them to describe what's happening in that situation. And this person will usually say something like, there was some, physical abuse, he slapped me in relation to money, or something that's more emotional, he said something, in front of the people that sort of like embarrassed me. While this person is flown above this situation, they get really emotional, and this person who's physically there will start to cry, weep. I've seen people break down. And me as the host, which is here, will ask this person to disassociate from this experience, because you're not the 14-year-old self. You are currently in 2000 and back then 22 or 21. I'll then ask them to float further above the situation. Imagine you're above the clouds. And then if they still can't disassociate, imagine you're on Mars and look downwards and see what is happening. Then I ask them these critical questions. As a disassociated self, looking back at your past, what can you learn from this? What can this 14-year-old self learn from this? So I'll be here saying, hey, what can you learn from this situation? And this person who is inhabited this, floating entity will be like, oh, I can't learn anything because I'm so emotional. I can't believe my father is a fucking asshole, blah, 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 right? I'm like, disassociate. What can you learn from this process? Now, guys, this is a very critical part of timeline therapy. As a client is in that emotional distress, we're trying to disassociate them from that event and learn a lesson there. If they can't learn a lesson from that guilt, shame, anger, sadness, and hate, they can't move on with that emotion. It becomes trapped. And that's why I term it emotional refinance. We need to replace these negative emotions at that point of time and replace that with a positive lesson learned at that stage in life. And it needs to come from the client. And the client will say something like, and then disassociate, and then be like, look, I guess my dad knew as much as he could. He had limited knowledge about money. It was just generational, poverty passed on to him. He didn't know much about money. I guess he struggled as much with money as I am struggling now, blah, 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 blah. And I'm here going, yeah, great. Is that what you learned? Keep floating. Keep floating. Do you still feel this sense of guilt and shame at that event over here? And then with the same emotion as we pass this event, I asked them to travel back in time from, 14-year-olds to when they were born. Do you still feel guilt, shame, anger, resentment in those timelines of your life? And if they go, oh, Q, I actually do feel it when I was 3 years old. Then I'm like, fuck, mate, I've got to do that whole fucking process again. No, I'm joking. I was very professional when I was doing it. And in that 60 minutes to 2 hours time, I'll repeat this process for all these negative emotions associated with money, sometimes down to when they were 0 years old, and sometimes past the womb before they were born. Yes, I had a case where a lady remembered events before she was born, that she was feeling guilt and shame towards money, like reincarnation days. Yikes. And it's only when this client goes, look, I don't feel any of these emotions related to money at 0 ages or whenever pre-0 ages, and I bring them back into the future or the current state. And then me over here will finally conclude the session and go, hey mate, do you still feel any of these negative emotions related to money as of today? And then they pause, deeply reflect, and they go, no. And that's when the refinance, emotional refinance is done. Timeline therapy is done. And I'm telling you guys, when I was a business mindset coach, which I was charging 5, 8 to 10K per session, because it was such a long session, emotionally draining, these guys after this session, after 2 to 3 months, fuck man, they were killing it, man. They were making decisions like lethal business owners, man. Everything was like sharp. No emotional barrier holding down on them. They were killing it in terms of business, life. They were just fucking in peace with themselves, in sync. And therefore, in a very long video, if you stayed thus far, is the number one reason why people can't accumulate wealth. And it's because of their bad association in the past with money. Jump in the comments, let me know what you think.